Welcome back. You're listening to Houston Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Shanna Register, and every week we bring you news and information you can use on your next real estate transaction. If you've got a real estate question, you can always call us here at the studio, 281-882-8088, and we'll be happy to answer your questions right here on the air every Sunday. So this segment, I've got some really interesting guests on to talk to you about something that you are going to want to know about. If you've never heard of it, you definitely want to stay tuned and listen to this segment. If you miss any of the segment, if you're driving and you miss any of it, you can always find it online at HoustonRealEstateRadio.com. So I've got Theresa Quartero Smith and Craig Brown here in the studio with me talking about 1031 exchanges. They are from the Investment Property Exchange Services here in Houston. And we're going to be talking about 1031 exchanges. And what I've found in real estate is that a lot of people aren't even aware that there's this 1031 exchange they can do with their properties. And it's such a huge tax benefit. So I've brought them on to talk to you about what you can do and what benefits you can have when you're selling properties. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
So tell us first, what is a 1031 exchange?
Well, a 1031 exchange basically allows a taxpayer, a seller of a property, to defer capital gains tax when they sell a property. Now, the property has to be held for investment or productive use in a trade or business. So something like a rent house would qualify. So when you sell a rent house, typically you hopefully have appreciation in value. Mm-hmm. You know, you bought the property for $200,000, you're selling it for $250,000, and there would be a tax on that $50,000 increase. Mm-hmm. But then you would also have a tax on the depreciation that you would have taken. So you get to take that depreciation deduction and write off tax liability, but then you have to recapture that, and there's another tax on that recapture when you sell that rent house. So those two taxes are able to be deferred so that you don't have to pay them if you go buy what's called like-kind property. That can be pretty broad when you're talking about real property. Another rent house, land, self-storage, apartment complex. So very broad when we're talking about real property for real property.
So this is not a personal residence. This has to be an investment property, right?
That's correct. Your personal residence is dealt with under a different code section.
Okay, so 1031 exchange has to do with any type of investment that has to do with land, buildings. It can even be commercial property, right? But it can be an investment like a rental house, like you said.
That's correct.
So give us some examples of ways that you've seen people use a 1031 exchange.
Okay. A lot of clients will sell one rent house, and maybe it's a rent house that they have because a couple got married, they kept one of their houses, they've rented it for 5 years.
A lot of people do that.
Right, exactly. And so now they're going to sell that house. They have a lot of equity built up in it, and they're going to sell that and buy two rent houses, or maybe they're going to buy a condo, maybe they're going to buy a small apartment complex.
Because it could be a second home too, right?
It could be. Now, there's very strict requirements for the use of a second home or vacation home in a 1031, but the IRS in 2008 issued a safe harbor. So you know exactly what you have to do. It can be done. It's a little bit restrictive, but it's perfectly safe to do. So
you could take your rental property, sell it, and go buy your second home and retire. Retire and have a second home to go to every once in a while. That's correct. I like that idea. Yes. So on a 1031 exchange, you said it can also be used for commercial. So give us an example of how you could use it in commercial. Well, in commercial, any type of asset that's sold, real property asset. So maybe it's a warehouse that's sold and somebody buys land, or maybe they buy another warehouse. Maybe they sell an apartment complex and buy other apartment complexes, hotels. One of the things is you can change the class of property as long as it's considered a real property right. So we even see transactions where maybe people are selling royalty interest in oil and gas leases, and now they want to buy what is traditionally, more traditional real estate. They're going to buy the office building as their replacement property. So that works as well. So land rights basically is what they're selling. They're the actual royalty interest. So it could be the rights, the land rights. It could be a true royalty interest where they just have a right to income off of the production. That's a real property right in Texas. Okay. Now, with a 1031 exchange, you can sell several properties and then buy one property, right? Absolutely. You could sell one, buy one, sell one, buy several, sell several, buy one, or several for several. So you've got a lot of options. So I know there's a lot of people out there listening thinking, this is a good thing.
Yes.
So there's got to be some stipulations on it if it's such a great thing, right?
Sure.
So let's talk about some of the things that hold people back from using. Why would someone not use a 1031 exchange? Are there some things that you really have to watch out for with it?
Yes, there are. Number one, the reason that people don't use it, they're not aware of it.
Okay.
Number two, if they are aware of it, they may not have enough gain in the property. Now, typically you have to employ an entity called a qualified intermediary to do these transactions. Mm-hmm. Their fee generally is going to be under $1,000,
which is like you guys. That's what you guys do.
That's what we do, right?
Okay. So investment property exchange services. That's what you guys do, is step in as kind of the intermediary in the transaction. Hold the money, basically.
That's correct. We're a required property. We're technically considered a principal in the transaction, not an escrow, not a fiduciary, but a principal in the transaction. And so you have to have that entity, and that's going to cost a fee. And so typically, if you have less than $15,000 or $20,000 of gain, there's really no reason to do it. Now, your tax liability would be higher than that, than the $1,000 fee, but you just don't want to do it just to break even.
Right.
So typically, we'll see $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 as an absolute minimum of gain on the sale of a property before you see somebody do an exchange.
Okay.
Now, some of the things that also prohibit people is maybe they have used the property too much personally if it's a second home or vacation home, and so they'll be thrown out of the ability to do that. Mm-hmm. Or they haven't held the property long enough. You can't hold a property just for the purpose of resale. So if you buy, rehab, and sell, then you're not going to qualify for 1031 treatment.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Right. And what about time frames? Are you limited on your time frames? Tell us about that.
Okay. The entire transaction, from the sell side transaction, the first sell side transaction, mm-hmm. until the last purchase transaction, cannot exceed 180 days. And those are calendar days, so Saturdays, Sundays, legal holidays count.
Okay.
Okay, you do not get any extensions.
180 days, so basically 6 months. I mean, you're half a year.
Yes, when you're talking about the tax code, you have to be a little bit precise. And it is true that generally that's 6 months, but there's case law out there where somebody thought 6 months. The true deadline is 180 days.
Okay. All right.
My wife calls me a tax geek, but that's okay.
That's an important deadline, because you will miss your advantage of doing the exchange if you miss that deadline.
Absolutely correct. So if you do not close, if you do not have the burdens and benefit of ownership shift into you as the taxpayer on your replacement property, by midnight of the 180th day, you lose your ability to characterize it as an exchange.
Okay. And so really, when you're selling multiple properties and even buying one property or multiple properties from the exchange, you really have to have a plan of action. You've got to know what you want to buy and kind of set it all up before you go into it.
That is absolutely true. That is the best way to proceed, because inside of that 180-day time frame, the first 45 days of that exchange period are called the identification period. So you actually have to have a written identification of what it is that you may purchase within that 180-day window. So the entire process is 180 days. The first 45 days is where the real rush comes in. Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're selling, let's say you're selling some rental houses, and you want to buy some more rental houses, and maybe you want to sell one rental house and buy another one, and you want to be in a certain area of town, you could pick multiple houses and identify those multiple houses, and then pick one, narrow it down to the one, right? So if a contract didn't go through on the one, you could pass over to the next one?
That is correct, with a limitation being a 3-property rule. So there are 2 basic rules for identifying. One is called the 3-property rule. So in that example, you would use the 3-property rule. You would pick 1, 2, or 3 potential replacement properties. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, you can buy any 1, any 2, or all 3 of those properties in your exchange. If, however, you wanted to put on your identification more than 3, then there is a cap on the aggregate fair market value.
Okay.
That's called the 200% rule. Mm-hmm. It's not used often in the scenario that you're describing because mathematically it doesn't work.
Right.
The 200% rule is where somebody sells a relatively large asset and wants to buy several small assets.
So really, this can be a complicated transaction. So you really need to know going into it, make a plan, and make sure financially you're going to get enough of a gain to make it work.
That's correct. Some of the bean counter terminology is you want to know what your gain is mm-hmm. on the sale. And to know that, you obviously are going to know your sales price, but you also have
know
to
your market values.
Right. You have to know your basis, your tax position in the property.
Right. So, okay, we're almost out of time. Tell me quickly, what's the last time you can pick to use this transaction? Because I'm thinking, you had to pick these properties out, and there's a lot to it. Can you get to the can you get involved in the process and get close to closing, and then go, oh, I wish I had done a 1031? And is there any going back?
There's no going back once you have closed. However, we do get calls from the closing table when someone is going to sell a property, and they'll maybe see a brochure in the title company lobby, and they'll say, well, I'm selling a rent house to buy another one.
So they would have missed their first 45 days of identifying and all of that. It's okay to do that?
No, they have to do this before they sell.
Oh, okay.
So the paperwork has to be in place before they close on the property they're selling. That's correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so calls from the closing table
can happen, and you can do it. You can make it happen.
That's right.
Okay. If people have questions about this, how can they contact you?
We have a toll-free number. It works nationwide. It's 888-337-1031.
1031. That's easy. Okay. Tell us one more time.
888-337-1031. And
it's called a 1031 exchange. So if you want to do a 1031 exchange, or if you're even interested in learning more about it, definitely that it's something that can benefit you on your taxes and be of great value to you. So I think it's a great service that you guys offer. Thank you so much, Theresa and Craig. We appreciate you coming on the show and telling us more about the 1031 program that y'all offer and the services y'all offer over at Investment Property Exchange Services.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right, thanks. We'll be right back here on Houston Real Estate Radio.